Can you identify which of the following sentences is or are independent clauses? Not sure what dependent and independent clauses are? Don't worry, we'll tackle each in this video, and we'll do some practice quizzes too to validate our understanding. Before we go ahead, we must take note that a clause, regardless of the type, must have a subject and a verb. A subject can be a noun, pronoun, noun phrase, gerund, gerund phrase, infinitive, infinitive phrase, or noun clause. Don't worry about that for now. We'll focus on the three most common ones: the noun, pronoun, or noun phrase. A verb can be any type of verb as long as it is a verb. Now, a dependent clause is a reliant type of clause. It relies or depends on the independent clause. It has a subject. It also has a verb. Actually, it must be that a clause must have a subject and a predicate, but the predicate always has a verb anyway, and it is quite a more complicated one. So let's use a subject and a verb for now. Let's try to use a noun for our subject. Let's have the name Joe and run for our verb. Joe runs every day. If we put a period right here, this clause will become a complete sentence. But that is not the nature of a dependent clause, because a dependent clause cannot stand alone to make a complete thought. And this clause here is giving us a complete thought. A dependent clause must be so lacking that when we read it, we know something is lacking. This clause right here is actually independent. Now, what more should we add to make it dependent, since we already have a subject and a verb? We need dependent marker words, subordinating conjunctions, and relative pronouns. These dependent marker words will set as an indication that a clause is dependent. Please take note that these two always appear first at the beginning of the clause since they introduce them as dependent. These words right here have their distinct functions. We know for sure they introduce a dependent clause, but their use depends on the meaning or thought we want to express. If you want to know more about them, we have links in the description box to our videos and blog posts that you might like to further your understanding of these two here and how to use them. Going back, let's use a subordinating conjunction for our example. Let's take although, and let's put it in our clause here. Although Joe runs every day. Now that is a dependent clause, that when you read it, you will not be satisfied because you know something is lacking. It needs more information to express a complete thought. So here are some examples of a dependent clause. These 5 clauses here have subjects and verbs, but they are dependent because of these words. And when we read them, we know some information is lacking, and that makes dependent clauses dependent or reliant on independent clauses. The independent clause, on the other hand, the same as dependent clause, has a subject and a verb, but they are not introduced by anything. Let's just take the same subject for our example. Joe. Joe is weak. We have the subject and we have the verb, but this time it is an auxiliary verb. When we read it, it does not leave us hanging compared to the dependent clause. And we can put a period right here because it already makes a complete sentence. Let's have more examples. Reading these clauses, we know that they do not leave us hanging because they give us complete thought. We can just put a period for them to become a sentence. Now, let's try combining these independent clauses with the dependent clauses. Combining the two clauses, we also make a complete sentence. Independent clauses can stand alone, even if we remove these dependent ones, but these dependent ones cannot. So they need independent clauses to make a complete thought, just like this. We no longer feel that something is missing. One last thing, in these sentences, the independent clauses come first, followed by the dependent ones. To spice things up, we can actually interchange the arrangement from the dependent clause and then the independent clause. But if we do it, we will need to put a comma in between them. Let's have a brief practice quiz to validate our understanding of the topic. Pause this video and label each sample clause dependent or independent clause. And the answers are: 1 is a dependent clause because of the word when. 2 is an independent clause because it is not introduced by anything. It went directly to the nouns as the subject. The same for clause number 3. And number 4, it is introduced by although. And then the same for clause number 5, it is introduced by if.